It was a heavy, humid Tuesday morning in August when Richard Nelson pulled up to the Blue Ridge Police Department in an old, dusty Ford that had seen better days. Blue Ridge, a sleepy town nestled in the rolling hills of North Carolina, was just starting to stir awake as he parked in the precinct lot. The sun had barely crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the pavement, and the air buzzed with the early tension of a day yet to unfold. Richard stepped out slowly, adjusting the brim of his worn baseball cap. He wore a plaid shirt, faded from time and countless washings, a pair of jeans frayed at the hems, and sneakers with soles that had almost given up. Nothing about his appearance suggested power or prestige. He looked like a man who had nowhere in particular to be, but inside he was laser-focused. This wasn't just any walk through a precinct, it was a test. He was the new police chief, just appointed days ago, but no one at this department knew what he looked like yet, and that was entirely intentional. Over the past 20 years, Richard had risen through the ranks with sweat, discipline, and a deep commitment to justice. A black man who had seen the inside of both corruption and reform, he knew that leadership from a podium was not the same as leadership from the ground. To truly fix a department, you had to first see it raw, unfiltered by pretense or performance. Today, he wasn't here to give a speech or shake hands. He was here to look inside the soul of this precinct, and what he was about to find would shake even his steeled resolve. As he walked toward the precinct's side entrance, the morning routine was in full swing. Officers bustled in and out, some sipping coffee, others laughing about last night's shift. The chatter was easy, relaxed. A few glanced at Richard, sizing him up with mild curiosity, but none recognized him. That was expected. The town's council had kept his appointment discreet until the official announcement later that day. Richard stepped inside. The smell of stale coffee and old paper hit him instantly. The floor tiles gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights, and the drone of phones and keyboards created a steady hum. He moved slowly, deliberately, watching how officers interacted, who they gravitated toward, who they avoided, the tone they used, with civilians lingering in the lobby. He paused just outside the break room, observing, and that's when it happened. A sharp voice cut through the air like a blade. "Hey, you!" Richard turned calmly. A tall white officer was striding toward him, a smirk curling on his lips. The badge read Daniels. Behind him, 3 other officers leaned against the wall with arms folded, eyes glittering with interest, like wolves who smelled weakness. Daniels stopped just short of Richard, eyes raking over his clothes. "Lost, are we? This isn't a shelter." The statement hung in the air, dripping with condescension. Richard said nothing. He'd expected something like this, just not this soon. "You need to take that mess somewhere else," Daniels continued. "We don't need people like you loitering around here." The officers behind him snickered. One of them muttered something about the riffraff. Richard's breath remained steady. His instincts urged him to speak up, to shut it down, but another part of him, the seasoned part, knew that truth revealed itself when you stayed quiet. "Didn't you hear me?" Daniels stepped closer, his voice rising. "Get out of here. You don't belong." The laughter grew louder. Richard's jaw tightened. He started to speak, but before a word could leave his lips, Daniels did something that shocked even his comrades. He spat right into Richard's face. Time stopped. The saliva landed hot on Richard's cheek, sliding down slowly. The room seemed to spin in stunned silence before erupting again in laughter. One officer actually doubled over, slapping the side of a vending machine in amusement. Richard stood still. His heart pounded, his fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't flinch. Slowly, he reached into his back pocket, pulled out a white handkerchief, and wiped his face with the grace of a man who refused to be moved. "Is this how you treat everyone who walks through these doors?" he asked quietly, his voice controlled but firm. Daniels sneered. "Only the ones who don't belong here." More laughter. Richard held the officer's gaze for a moment, then turned and walked away without another word. The precinct might have thought it had just humiliated a stranger. They had no idea. Moments later, the intercom buzzed overhead, calling all personnel to the main briefing room for a special announcement. Officers groaned, grabbed their coffee cups, and began filing in, unaware they were minutes away from a reckoning. The briefing room was noisy as usual, people joking, leaning back in chairs, exchanging morning gossip. Daniels stood near the back, still wearing his smug grin, telling the story of the homeless guy he kicked out. Several laughed along, none of them noticing Richard had quietly slipped in through a side door. He now wore a blazer over his plaid shirt, and in his hand was a black leather folder bearing the seal of the Blue Ridge Police Department. At the front of the room, Captain Harris stepped to the podium. A stocky man with a weathered face and a graying mustache, he cleared his throat. "All right, settle down. This won't take long, but it's important." The room quieted. "As most of you know, Chief Caldwell retired last month. We've been waiting on a replacement, and I'm pleased to announce that today is the day." He nodded toward the side of the room. Richard stepped into view. The change in atmosphere was instant. Silence gripped the room like a vice. Officers stared in disbelief. Daniel's grin evaporated. His skin turned pale, then red, as his body stiffened like a man watching a slow-moving train he couldn't escape. "My name is Richard Nelson," Richard said evenly, "and as of this morning, I am your new chief of police." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Richard walked to the podium with measured steps and placed the folder down. He scanned the room slowly. Some officers stared with shame. Others looked away. Daniels stood frozen, his arms limp at his sides. "When I arrived this morning," Richard began, "I didn't come in uniform. I didn't come through the front door. I came like any ordinary person might, because I wanted to see this department through an unfiltered lens." He paused. "What I saw was troubling." Murmurs broke out. Richard raised a hand to silence them. "In just a few minutes, I witnessed behavior that was not only unprofessional, but disgraceful. I saw prejudice, cruelty, and a lack of respect for human dignity. And let me be clear, that culture ends today." The room was dead silent. He continued, stepping forward, "Respect is not optional. It is the foundation of law enforcement. Without it, we fail each other and the people we serve." He looked directly at Daniels. "This morning, some of you laughed when you thought you saw a powerless man being put in his place. But let me remind you, every single person who walks through these doors, uniformed or not, deserves respect." Daniels shifted uncomfortably. Sweat rolled down his temple. Richard turned and walked closer. "Officer Daniels," he said, stopping just a few feet away, "you represent everything that's broken in this department. When you spat in my face, it wasn't just me you disrespected, it was the badge. It was the oath. It was the people who trust us to protect them." Daniels stammered, "Chief, I didn't know." "That's exactly the problem," Richard snapped, voice sharp. "You didn't care to know. You acted on assumption, entitlement, and arrogance. That's how trust dies, one thoughtless act at a time." The officers sat frozen in their seats, the weight of his words pressing on their shoulders. "What I witnessed wasn't just one man's mistake," Richard said, addressing them all now. "It was a culture that encourages bullying, covers for misconduct, and laughs at humiliation." He walked back to the front. "And that stops now." He turned to Captain Harris. "Effective immediately, Officer Daniels is suspended, pending a full internal investigation." Gasps echoed through the room. Daniels's face burned with embarrassment. He glanced around as his former allies looked away. "And let me be clear," Richard added, "this is not a warning. It's the first of many changes." He allowed the silence to stretch before concluding, "If you're ready to do better, to be better, I will walk with you every step of the way. But if you're not, you don't belong here." The meeting ended with no applause, just silence. Officers filed out, heads low, conversations hushed. Richard remained at the podium, watching as Daniels stormed past him and out the door. Back in his office, Richard sank into his chair and exhaled. He knew this was just the beginning. Minutes later, the phone rang. "Chief, it was Captain Harris. I just wanted to say, you handled that better than most would have." "Thank you, Captain," Richard replied. "But now, the real work begins. I want Daniel's file on my desk tomorrow. Every complaint, every report. You'll have it," Harris replied. After a pause, he added, "You shook them today." In a good way, Richard hung up and allowed himself one moment of quiet pride. In the weeks that followed, The department changed, slowly but noticeably. The tension didn't disappear, but respect began to take root. Daniels's suspension turned into a termination. After a review uncovered a history of misconduct, excessive force, racial profiling, inappropriate comments. Complaints previously ignored were finally heard. Officers began walking the halls differently, quieter, more thoughtful. Some avoided Richard, others greeted him respectfully. A few, like young Officer Reyes, approached him directly. "I want to do better," she said one afternoon. "I stayed quiet before. I was scared." "That's all I ask," Richard replied. "It starts with you." Community meetings became more frequent. Officers now attended in uniform, some still skeptical, others eager to reconnect. At one such event, a young boy approached Richard shyly. "Are you really the chief?" "I am," Richard said with a warm smile. "My dad says the police don't care about us." Richard crouched to the boy's eye level. "I can't change the past," he said, "but I promise we're working to do better. And if you ever need help, you come find me, okay?" The boy nodded, smiling. And in that moment, Richard knew it was worth it. He hadn't come to Blue Ridge to make friends. He came to make a difference, and he had only just begun.